side. We'll now move to question time, and Senator Nampijinka-Price.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, Australians were prepared to recognise Indigenous Australians, but Prime Minister Albanese instead insisted on attaching the voice to Labor's proposed question. Why did your government refuse to separate the two and deny Indigenous Australians recognition within the Constitution?
Thank you, Senator Nampijinka-Price. Senator Wong.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Nampijinka-Price for her question. And I want to start by acknowledging first that for many Australians, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, the referendum result is disappointing and many feel a deep sense of loss. And I want to make the point, in response to Senator Nampijinka-Price's question, that this was a request from Indigenous people. I appreciate you have a different view to those that were consulted, those that came together at Uluru in 2017 and issued the Uluru Statement, a process that involved hundreds of meetings and thousands of people. And this government promised that we would seek to implement that statement, and we kept that promise. We respect and accept the decision of the Australian people, and we all know how hard referenda are. Only 8 out of 44 having succeeded, and all of those had bipartisan support, and regrettably there was no bipartisan support in relation to this referendum. But this isn't the end of our efforts to bring people together, and I think it's important to remember that Australians did vote. Whilst Australians did vote against this constitutional change, Australians did not vote against closing the gap or reconciliation. I noticed that Senator Little made similar comments today or yesterday. The point of the referendum, as Senator Nampijinka-Price knows too well, is that was the request that came from leaders, Indigenous leaders and representatives, and from the referendum working group, from the Uluru State from the Heart, and what lay beneath it, which was a grassroots process. I accept that some have a different view, but I think it is very clear that this was a request to us and a request that the Prime Minister made a commitment to honour, and he did.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Nampijinka-Price, first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. Voice, treaty, truth. The Prime Minister has proudly said he will deliver the Uluru Statement in full, despite not having read it. Can you confirm reports in The Australian today that state that Mr Albanese will still pursue treaty through the federally funded Makarrata Commission?
Thank you, Senator Nampijinka-Price. Minister.
I can confirm what the Prime Minister said on Saturday night. He said we will take the time to listen to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Our guiding principle will be what can we do together to get better results for Indigenous Australians. And I think, as I said, that is something that Australians do agree on. People had a different view about constitutional change, but I think there is overwhelming support for ending disadvantage and improving outcomes for our First Peoples. We will continue to listen to Indigenous Australians about what works and what can make a practical difference in communities. Obviously, the priorities that the government has are the priorities Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have themselves spoken about. Health, education, jobs and housing. And we have obviously previously outlined our strategic priorities for closing the gap and committing additional investment, some $424 million.
Minister. Senator Nampijinka-Price, second supplementary.
Thank you, Senator. I refer to the explanation of Treaty and Truth by Pat Anderson to an MUA forum in November 2020. Treaty and truth go together because we have to have the bloodletting, if you like, before we can talk about any kind of settlement. So those two things go together. It's a little bit more than reconciliation. It's part of a very painful, which I suspect will be a very painful exercise. In light of Saturday's rejection of the voice, will the government listen to the Australian people who voted for unity and rejected bloodletting? Will you abandon Mr Albanese's plans for yet more division?
Thank you, Senator. The time for asking has expired. Minister Wong.
Actually, what this government seeks to do is to bring people together and to try and work together to address the gaps facing Indigenous Australians. That was the motivation behind the referendum. As I said, the ask of Indigenous leaders after a long grassroots process. People are entitled to different views, and there are different views in this chamber. But I think people should also respect the views of the many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who were part of that consultation process which led to the Statement from the Heart. And really, I think that is borne out by the results in the referendum, where in many areas, including remote communities with high Indigenous populations, it tells us a lot about what Indigenous Australians want. Wade, 92% support.
Senator Cash.
92% support. Tiwi Islands, 84% support. And Yuendamu, 75% report for the
Thank you,
Yuendamu and
Minister
similar
Wong. The time
polling
for
places.
answering has expired. Senator Giacone.
Thank you very much, President. President, my question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Wong. Minister, could you please provide an update to the Senate on the current situation with respect to the Israel-Hamas conflict?
Thank you, Senator Giacone. Minister Wong.
I thank Senator Giacone for his question. I acknowledge his deep interest, along with many others on this side of the chamber and I think across this parliament, in Middle East peace. As I have said many times since these awful events unfolded on Saturday, the attack by Hamas was a shocking assault on Israel and on the Jewish people, and we unequivocally condemn these attacks. And we understand how distressing they are for not only the Australian Jewish community, but communities everywhere. We call for the immediate release of hostages. There is no justification for this attack, and we recognise Israel's right to defend itself and to re-establish its security. As I said earlier today, Hamas is a terrorist group that rules Gaza with no regard for the safety and security of the Palestinian people who live there. And their actions Hamas's actions have precipitated a devastating situation in Israel and Gaza, and civilians are suffering. Australia's principal position in all contexts is to call for the protection of civilian lives and the observance of international humanitarian law. Why do we do that? These are principles that protect everybody. This is why we have seen widespread calls across the international community for the protection of civilians. In response to the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza, Australia is providing an initial $10 million in humanitarian assistance through trusted partners for civilians affected by the conflict, for water, nutrition, sanitation and hygiene services, and to support medical treatment for the victims of the conflict. We also call for safe and unimpeded humanitarian access to Gaza and the rapid establishment of a humanitarian corridor. We want to ensure essential humanitarian relief can reach civilians. And again, we commend the work of many in the international community towards this goal.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Giacone, first supplementary.
Thanks again, President, and thank you, Minister, for that answer. Minister, could you please outline the work of the Australian government to assist many Australians that have been caught up in the Israel-Gaza conflict, and what work that DFAT has been doing?
Minister.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Giacone. The Australian government immediately began supporting Australians in Israel, Gaza and the West Bank after the initial attack. And on Monday, I directed my department to assess all options for Australians wanting to leave. We secured commercial options for assisted departures and readied the ADF to assist should commercial options no longer be viable. As of this morning, more than 1,200 Australians previously registered have left Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, including more than 400 Australians and their families on 4 Australian government flights. I would like to ensure I make this information public. Subject to factors including the security environment, we are planning 2 additional flights to Dubai today, and we have secured flights for onward travel from London and Dubai. We continue to assist more than 1,000 registered Australians and 39 consular cases.
Senator Giacone, second supplementary.
Thank you again, President, and thank you again, Minister, for that answer. I'm sure many families will be welcoming those Aussies back home. What is the government's message for Australians who are rightly concerned about Hamas's terror attacks on Israel and the disturbing scenes that we have witnessed as protests in Australia last week?
Minister Wong.
Australians are distressed by what they have seen, what they are watching and what they have lost. And we know that this conflict has touched many Australians and is felt most acutely in our Jewish communities and our Palestinian communities. I would make this point. There is a long, complex and disputed history to this region. It is deeply felt. It is close to the heart of many. It is why I have continued to urge all to express their views respectfully, as has the Prime Minister and other ministers in the government. We should be clear. There is no place for anti-Semitism in this country. There is no place for Islamophobia. There's no place for prejudice, and there's no place for hatred of any kind. We must maintain mutual respect here at home, and politicians have a role in that, to speak and behave in a respectful way, not regardless of difference.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Little.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator Gallagher. It has been reported in the media today that the government will pursue treaty and truth-telling despite the failure of the Voice referendum. At a time when the nation needs healing, the grave fear of many Australians is that a treaty process would lead to further division and come at the expense of better outcomes on the ground. Rather than more division or symbolism, will you accept the offer of bipartisanship and agree to an audit of all spending on Indigenous programs to ensure that the money spent at every level goes to where it is needed the most and practically helps to close the gap?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Little for the question. And I think for all of us in this chamber, we always look for working together, reaching across party divides and political divides to find agreement and reach agreement. You know, that's been the position of the Prime Minister from the beginning, particularly in relation to the referendum that we just had. In relation to the question around an audit of programs, well, there was a number of kind of areas that Senator Little went to, but there was an audit by the ANAO that was just handed down in May this year that looked particularly at programs being run through the NIAA. I note 7 recommendations, of which the NIAA accepted all of them, and it did cover a period of time that those opposite were in government, and it did show that there was a number of areas in relation to non-compliance and fraud prevention and things like that in relation to the programs that were funded that needed improvements, to which the NIAA has committed and to which the Minister for Indigenous Affairs will be seeing through. So there has been quite a significant piece of work done. I think the ANAO's reputation and expertise in this area, probably they are the preeminent body to do that work. That work has been done, and we will make sure that those recommendations are implemented. And of course we will continue to listen and work with First Nations organisations you know, as they roll out programs, because I think there is an agreement across the country that focus on practical outcomes and improving outcomes for First Nations Australians is a priority.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Little, first supplementary.
Thank you. While being distracted with its failed referendum, the only practical policy action taken by the Albanese Labor government in Indigenous Affairs was actually to abolish the cashless debit card and expose Indigenous communities, women, children, old people, to further abuse and neglect and violence. How much worse is alcohol abuse, drug abuse and violence and assault getting in the communities where Labor abolished the cashless debit card?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I don't accept the assertions that are being put forward in that question, and I completely
order on my left. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. I completely reject the allegations of distraction. In fact, and if those opposite were being genuine and actually understood or had watched what has been going on in the past year since we came to government, where we inherited a number of programs in First Nations portfolio which had no ongoing funding at all. How about that? Okay, and we fixed all that. And not only did we fix that and address that, we have also invested more money into areas where there needs further investment. And this is being led in partnership with states and territories, including the Northern Territory, to make sure that we are getting the better outcomes that we are after. And importantly, working hand in hand with those on the ground, community organisations, and listening to them about what works.
Thank you,
that
Minister.
is what we are doing.
Senator Little, second supplementary.
So the Prime Minister has spent $450 million on his divisive failed referendum, but still refuses to spend $12 million for Yiperinya School in Alice Springs to provide urgently needed accommodation for at-risk Indigenous children to help close the gap. Will the Albanese government listen to the need for practical action, not symbolism, and support those at-risk children?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Little for the supplementary. I don't accept the costings that she's outlined in relation to the referendum, and I would point out, back in the day when it was bipartisan, there was an investment made and an allocation made in the budget by the former government, almost half of that, I think, from memory, nearly in the order of $200 million for constitutional recognition. So in that fact, the funding we provided to the AEC was, thank you, Senator Farrell, was in the order of $386 million, of which half was met from the allocation that had been left by Senator Birmingham when he was Finance Minister. We will continue to listen, and we will continue to work hand in hand with First Nations organisations on the ground about the support and investment that they need.
Please. Senator Little.
The question was actually about Yiperinya School. And I haven't mentioned, there hasn't been any mention of Yiperinya School.
Senator Little, I do remind you there was also a question, there was a statement about the dollars spent in the referendum, and the minister has answered that part of the question.
References to Yiperinya.
And as she's entitled to. It wasn't a direct question on the school. There was a preamble there, and the minister is being relevant. Thank you.
In relation to that, I understand an unsolicited proposal has been provided to the NIA and it is under consideration.
Has expired. Senator Cox.
Thank you, President. I rise to ask a question to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Minister Wong. The government has committed to the federal Aboriginal cultural heritage legislation in the wake of the tragic disaster at Juukan Gorge. Recently, in my home state of Western Australia, Rio Tinto damaged another cave at Namaldi. My question to the Minister is, when can we expect to see an exposure draft of this bill?
Thank you, Senator Cox. Minister Wong.
Thank you, Senator Cox. And I first want to say that I think all of us, or I hope all of us, would remain appalled by what occurred at Juukan Gorge. And I did see, obviously, it's not the, there's been quite a lot on in politics and policy over some time, but I did see that there had been reporting of a further problem in terms of activities by Rio Tinto. The advice I have is that the government is continuing to work on reforms. When we first responded to the Juukan Gorge inquiries, we committed to reforming national heritage protection laws in partnership with the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance, which was a group established after Juukan, made up of over 30 First Nations groups. Obviously, it's very important this is done right. The process is underway, and I hope that there is, as I'm advised, a really thorough and thoughtful consultation, because there should be. The process is in early stages. The government will also be consulting with business, farmers, environment groups and many others as we go. I The Minister has indicated that she is also concerned that the Wintawari Guruma Aboriginal Corporation have said that rock shelter at Tom Price Mine is now in a fragile state. I'm advised that the Minister has written to Rio Tinto about comments made by traditional owners about Rio Tinto's blast management procedures and have asked them to work with the corporation to address their concerns. There is no federal government application for emergency protection of the site.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cox, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister Wong. It's important that this bill has broad support to ensure its ongoing success. Can the Minister outline what stakeholders the government has been consulting with in the process of developing this bill?
Thank you, Senator Cox. Minister Wong.
Well, first, the list I have is, as I have said, the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance, which I'm advised is made up of over 30 First Nations groups, and there is also a commitment to consult with business, farmers, environment groups and many others. The Senator raised the issue of the importance of broad support. It is unfortunate, and we've seen some of it in this chamber, that there are some who would rather have a divisive, angry debate over this than actually try and work, as this Senate was able to, in relation to the parliamentary inquiry. The Parliament was able to, in the context of the parliamentary inquiry chaired by Warren Ench. And I think we've seen the politics played on this issue. I would hope that people would come together and actually work out how we protect this heritage.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Cox, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. In the co-design process, will the government guarantee that free, prior and informed consent from traditional owners will be a key feature in this legislation to protect and preserve First Nations cultural heritage that is both tangible and intangible?
Thank you, Senator Cox. Minister Wong.
Well, I think it's always unwise to preempt a consultation process, Senator, I will ensure I take advice about what is the most precise answer to your direct question. But I would make the point that the Minister has made clear her intention to ensure a proper consultation process with First Nations representatives through the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance. I have no doubt that the nature of consent will be important to that and what that constitutes, what is required for informed consent. I am sure that that will be a focus of these consultations because it's obviously an issue that is of great importance to community.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Early Childhood Education, Senator Watt. We know that quality early childhood education and care can transform a child's life. Yet the ACCC has found that under the former government, early childhood education and care costs went up by twice as much as the OECD average between 2018 and 2022. With cost of living pressures front of mind for many Australians, what action is the Albanese government taking to ensure early childhood education and care is more affordable for Australian children and their families now?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. I'm surprised that opposition members don't want to hear about cost of living relief for Australian families, but I guess they have voted against every other form of cost of living relief we've provided. I guess they've kept on voting against cost of living relief. But unlike the opposition, Senator O'Neill and our colleagues are concerned about cost of living relief. It's an amazing statistic, Senator O'Neill, isn't it, that under the former government, childcare costs went up by twice as much as the OECD average between 2018 and 2022. And the Albanese government knows very well that Australian families are facing cost of living pressures across the board, whether that's in housing, energy, healthcare or childcare. And that's why for our entire time in office we've been delivering genuine cost of living relief, unfortunately so often opposed by those opposite. And as Minister Gallagher has previously said, the Albanese government is rolling out measures to reduce the impact of cost of living increases, particularly when it comes to making early childhood education more affordable. The simple fact is that under the previous government, early childhood education fees increased by around 49%. And these steep increases, overseen by the Coalition, only served as a barrier for families to find places for their kids in centres. By contrast, the Albanese government knows that our more affordable early learning plan is not just a social reform, it is an integral economic reform, one that is driving increased workforce participation, particularly for women, and enabling skilled workers to return to the workforce. More affordable early childhood education and care means that more Australian children can access the transformational health and education benefits of foundation years, learning no matter what their postcode or background is. More affordable early childhood education and care is a win-win for Australian families, delivering cost of living relief while also making it easier to increase household income. The government is taking the next steps in building the world-class affordable early childhood education system that Australian parents expect and Australian kids deserve.
Senator O'Neill, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Around 1.2 million Australian families right across Australia are now eligible for the government's increased childcare subsidy. What benefit is the new subsidy rate delivering to the household budget of 1.2 million Australian families?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you again, Senator O'Neill. I'm pleased to say that the government's cheaper childcare reforms are delivering real cost of living relief to Australian families right now. In the first week of our landmark reforms, families paid 14% less per hour per child for centre-based daycare, 14% less per hour per child as a result of the Albanese government's changes. And thanks to the increased childcare subsidy, a family earning $120,000 with one child in care can expect to save about $2,000 in early childhood education and care costs this financial year. And I take the interjection, it does make a real difference to families' costs, Senator O'Neill, and that's what the Albanese government is about, is helping people with these costs. Apart from the mortgage or the rent, early childhood education and care is one of the biggest bills that a lot of families pay, and we are making it cheaper. This means more children can access more of the health and education benefits achieved by access to quality early childhood education and care and more cost of living relief.
Senator O'Neill, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, for that response to the reality of 1.2 million Australian families. Thanks to the increased subsidy, parents now have more choice when it comes to taking on more hours of paid work or taking on study. What's the government doing to ensure we have a sustainable early childhood education workforce to support those Australian families?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. Well, it's not just cost that has proven a barrier for Australian families looking to find a placement for their child. Ensuring that there are enough workers to look after your child was also a struggle under the previous government. But since we took office in May 2022, Australia's early childhood education and care sector has grown by more than 14,000 workers, with a further 123,000 additional educators and teachers in the training pipeline. So the Albanese government is not only making early childhood education and care cheaper for families, we're actually delivering the workforce that the former government failed to deliver. The government's successful fee-free TAFE program is helping encourage people into the sector, with the Certificate 3 in Early Childhood Education and Care being the most popular fee-free TAFE course. At the same time, the government's early childhood education workforce package is helping to retain the existing highly skilled early learning workforce. We're delivering childcare relief and also the workforce.
Has expired. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Wong. It's based on a constituents' inquiry. Australian journalist Cheng Lei was convicted in China of illegally providing state secrets to overseas parties and imprisoned. Cheng Lei was recently released and arrived back in Australia last week. Minister, can you inform the Senate what role you had personally, your department had, and the Prime Minister had in the release of Cheng Lei?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. I thank the senator for his question, and obviously, as you would expect, this is an issue on which there has been a lot of discussion at various levels with the Chinese authorities urging the return of Ms. Cheng and urging her to be able to return to Australia. I can indicate to you, obviously some of this is at officer level. I can indicate to you, as I said publicly at the time, this was a topic of my first engagement with the then Foreign Minister Wang Yi when I first met him at the first bilateral discussion in Bali. I would make it is the practice of Australian governments to ensure that we raise consular cases with other countries, China included, at all appropriate meetings, and I can indicate to the Senator that Ms. Cheng Lei was the subject of representations from me, the Prime Minister and officers, just as other consular cases such as Dr Young and those obviously facing criminal charges. We made those representations at the Prime Minister level, at the Foreign Minister level, at officer level, and we will continue to do so. I would acknowledge also that this is the practice under successive governments, and I spoke to former Senator Payne after I had met Ms. Cheng Lei at the airport to let her know before the news became public. I want to acknowledge, because I acknowledge that she also raised this.
Time for answering has expired. Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
Thank you. The Chinese Ministry of State has posted on Weibo that Cheng Lei had been sentenced to 2 years, 11 months in prison and had been deported after completing her sentence. Minister, your words on Cheng Lei's arrival at the airport, as quoted in The Guardian, made it clear that the government was taking credit for her release, quoting you as saying, "I made them a promise some time ago I would do everything I could to bring her home." Minister, who is telling the truth, you or the Chinese government?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Wong.
Come on, Malcolm. Who do you think, Malcolm? Come on, Malcolm.
I regret, Senator, and you and I have differences of opinions, but I regret that you would use something I said about what I said to her children in that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I do. No, not seriously. I think that was it was an expression of I hope emotion and a degree of humanity. I think because like all Australians, I wanted to see a mother return to her children. That was also what I said publicly. I don't try. The Chinese legal system has been completed. We have seen what they have said. That is the articulation of the Chinese legal position. What I can say is we made it a priority to make representations, and we did.
Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, is this a case that proves the Albanese government's misinformation and disinformation bill should not exclude government misinformation and disinformation, and instead should include government misinformation and disinformation?
Minister Wong. Senator Roberts, I'm not sure how it relates, but I'm sure the minister will respond as she sees fit.
Senator Roberts, there is no misinformation on our side. There is no disinformation on our side. And what we have said, and if you had actually tracked every engagement I've had with the Chinese authorities and what I've said afterwards when I have articulated, at least in summary version, what I said to the Chinese authorities, what the Prime Minister said to his counterparts, you would know that we have made these representations. You would know that. Now, all I can say is this. This is not a partisan issue. This is not a political issue. This is an issue about an Australian who is now home with her children. And behind her were many Australians across this country and across the political divide who made the same representations to Chinese authorities at all levels that Australians wanted to see a mother united with her children. And I think that
Thank
is
you,
a good thing. It was a
Minister.
great
The time for
privilege to
answering
have
has
the opportunity
expired.
to meet.
Senator Duniam.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. In the lead-up to the last election, the then opposition leader, Mr Albanese, stated that, quote, instead of doing photo ops, the Prime Minister should focus on reducing the cost of living, and that, quote, Australians are being hit with a triple whammy of skyrocketing essentials. They deserve a government with a plan to ease the cost of living, end quote. Minister, how much worse off have Australians become as a result of Mr Albanese's overseeing skyrocketing prices of essential goods with no government plans to ease cost of living pressures, but plenty of T-shirt wearing photo ops?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, what we've learnt and what we've seen on national display over the past month has been a Prime Minister who delivers on his promises to the Australian people, and the commitments that he made in the lead-up to the election are the commitments that he delivers on in government. And in relation to cost of living, and I do find it interesting when the opposition asks us questions about what have you done on cost of living, when, without exception, I think, they have opposed every single measure that we have sought. So this, again, signifies the approach the opposition takes on everything. No solutions, no plans, no ideas, just blockers. They want to block and they want to criticise, but they have no plans of their own. Energy bill relief. Remember that? Voted no to that. Cheaper childcare. Increased rent assistance, Medicare bulk billing, cheaper medicines, boosting income support payments, fee-free TAFE, building more affordable homes, the Housing Australia Future Fund.
Please resume your seat. Before I go to Senator Duniam, I am going to remind all senators across the chamber that those interjections are disorderly. Senator Duniam.
Point of order on direct relevance, President. I asked how much worse off Australians are, not the voting record in this place.
And there, order, and there was a few significant sentences before that about the Prime Minister. You talked about plans and other things. The Minister is being relevant, but I will continue to listen closely. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I mean, my argument that I'm putting, President, is that Australians are being supported by this government with the investments that we're making to deal with cost of living pressures without adding to inflation, that those opposite blocked. And whilst we've been doing all that, and I think since the last time we met, remember we have actually delivered the first budget surplus in 15 years. Remember that? So we're fixing the mess, making the investments, despite your opposition to it. And your opposition does make it harder because we have to make sure we get the numbers to pass the legislation to allow that support to flow. But that's exactly what we're doing. It's what the Prime Minister does every single day. And yes, he worked to support a referendum, and he worked hard to support that because he said he would, and he did that. And at the same time, and every single day he was doing that, he was working on addressing cost of living pressures for all Australians. And you can see that in the record that I've just outlined.
Senator Duniam, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Mr Albanese promised to deliver a plan to ease the cost of living, yet Australian families are being hit with skyrocketing fuel prices, increasingly unaffordable groceries and interest rates stuck at the highest rate in 12 years. Will Mr Albanese apologise for making things worse since Labor took power?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister Gallagher.
Well, what the Prime Minister and the government does is recognise that there has been a war in Ukraine, in case you hadn't noticed that, that has effect on inflation, that the worst quarter of inflation was actually in the quarter that you departed government, and that we came in and, well, I'm just putting the facts there so you can accept the facts there. Okay, so that's the economic environment we inherited, and every single day since then we have been working to make sure we put downward pressure on inflation and recognise that families are doing it tough, recognise that Australians are doing it tough, and look at those areas where we can make a difference. And whether it be childcare, whether it be cheaper medicines, whether it be energy bill relief, whether it be getting the Housing Australia Future Fund up so that we can start reinvesting in social housing after the Commonwealth left it and abandoned it for the last decade. That is what we've been doing, and it's what we will continue to do.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Duniam, second supplementary.
Thanks, President. In March last year, the Minister said the The only way to deal with the cost of living is to change the government. Minister, with Australians struggling from the worst and most crippling cost of living pressures seen in decades, isn't it now a fact that the change to Labor has been an expensive failure for every Australian household?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister Gallagher.
Well, from those that opposed almost every single measure that goes to supporting households, I mean, it might work into your narrative, your no solutions blocking narrative, but every single thing that we have taken into this chamber to make a difference, to actually ease pressures on households, you have complained about, argued against and then voted against. That's what you've done. And we are assisting families with childcare. We are making medicines cheaper. We are ensuring that people get relief on their energy bills. These are all things that make a difference to people's households and how they manage their budgets day to day. So I think the Australian people recognise they have a government that doesn't want to just have those photo ops that your government was so famous for. You couldn't get in the way of Mr Morrison and a camera, and actually deliver on the change that this country needs, including in the area of energy and climate change, which has been so needlessly abandoned in the previous decade.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, President. My question is for the Minister representing the Minister for Environment, Senator Wong. Currently, the Environment Minister is not required to consider the impacts of all significant gas developments on the critical water resources. This is a failure of our environment laws. Fracking developments like the Beetaloo Basin in the Northern Territory damage groundwater systems without any regard for our rivers, drinking water or the voices of traditional owners. The Albanese government previously committed to fix this by expanding the water trigger under the EPBC Act by the end of this year. How will the government keep this promise and make sure this amendment is done before we leave here in December?
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Minister Wong.
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young, and thank you, President. I do recall that there was a lot of discussion about the water trigger during one part of the campaign. I am advised that the Labor government's new environmental laws will include an expanded water trigger to cover all forms of non-conventional gas, including shale gas. Consultation on draft laws begins this month. We would welcome support across party lines. That might be more hopeful than realistic, but obviously these things are always better if they can be resolved at least with some cross-party support. In the meantime, the government has made available our independent expert scientific committee on coal seam gas and large coal mining development to assist in assessing the impact of gas projects seeking their approval. This is the same committee that will assess water impacts of projects when the water trigger is legislated. Senator Hanson-Young, I think you asked two parts of the question. I've partly answered them. You asked when. I think my advice obviously indicates still in the process of being consulted. You asked how would we ensure that this occurs by the end of the year. Well, in part that is in the hands of those in this chamber. Well, that's true. That's true. That's true. I accept that, but I would make the point that obviously sometimes we have cooperation on passage. I think those opposite have demonstrated that that's not how they wish to operate in this chamber. I would make the point. I think there was a fair bit of cooperation previously, but clearly that's
Thank you, Minister Wong. The
mood.
time for answering has expired. Senator Hanson-Young, first supplementary.
Thank you. Clearly the rest of the EPBC reforms will not be done by the end of this year. I've recently written to the Environment Minister offering the Greens support to pass the water trigger by December. I urge you to ask the Environment Minister whether she will take up this offer.
Minister Wong.
Thank you for writing to the Environment Minister, Senator Hanson-Young, and I wasn't going to say that. But thank you for the suggestion, Senator Birmingham. and I'm sure that the Environment Minister will respond to you in due course. As I understand the history of this, obviously we did have the Samuel Review, which was very clear that the EPBC Act is ineffective and that good outcomes for the environment cannot be achieved under these new laws. As I said in my earlier answer to your primary question, the government will soon begin consultation on the detail of new environmental laws. I am advised, my brief says 2 months ahead of schedule. That doesn't quite accord with your primary question, so I will just put that is what I am advised. I also understand that more than 30 groups
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Hanson-Young, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. The consultation that the minister refers to is for a select few. The government has actually dumped public consultation and release of the reform package. Why and when will the public see the entire reform package for themselves?
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Minister.
Thank you. Well, it's not uncommon to have a group of a representative group or groups with experts with different perspectives to look at draft legislation before government comes to the point of actually consulting on detailed legislation. That's not an uncommon process, Senator Hanson-Young. So I would push back on your suggestion that we've dumped a process. Having taken some legislation, through this parliament previously, that is not an unusual process to try and have a smaller group. In this case, some experts from more than 30 groups, including environment, business and industry, who are able to carefully examine the detail to make sure the laws are as effective as possible. I mean, this is a very complex piece of legislation. It's been added to over time. It's obviously been in place for some time. There will be different views, and I'm sure there will be capacity for the community to see it before it's
Senator Walsh.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Finance and the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Since the election, the Albanese government has been working to deliver policies that will ease cost of living pressures on Australians. Can the minister update the Senate on the steps the government is taking to support Australians who are still feeling the pressure on household budgets?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the question. And as in my answer to Senator Duniam, when I repeat that the Albanese government's #1 priority remains addressing the inflation and cost of living challenge that we are seeing across the economy. We have a very well-calibrated plan that doesn't make the inflation challenge worse, but materially supports families and households across Australia who are feeling the pinch of higher prices. It's a plan that we've been working on since we took office in May last year, and indeed before, with the election commitments that we took to the Australian people. And that plan includes energy bill relief. It includes the cheaper childcare that my colleague, Minister Watt, outlined. It includes the commitments we have included in our budget, including increased rent assistance, tripling the Medicare bulk billing rate, the decision we've taken around cheaper medicines, around boosting income support payments, particularly for those on lower or relying totally on those income payments like JobSeeker and supporting parents payment, fee-free TAFE training, building more affordable homes, expanding paid parental leave to give families more choice, and getting wages moving again. These are all elements of our plan to make sure that we can deal with the inflation challenge and provide that essential cost of living support whilst families and households across Australia need it. We've done this at the same time we've delivered the first budget surplus in 15 years. We've seen wages grow at the fastest rate in a decade, and we've seen over 550,000 jobs created since we came to government, a record for any new government ever. And what have we seen from those opposite, President? They've said no to those the energy bill relief. They said no to the Housing Australia Future Fund. They said no to halving the cost of medicines.
First supplementary.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Minister. Minister, what are some of the causes, including international circumstances, that are contributing to the sustained cost of living pressures being felt across Australia?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the supplementary. Well, inflation and interest rates, as we know, were on the rise before we came to government last year. The war in Ukraine certainly caused havoc on energy prices around the world and here at home. And the recent tensions in the Middle East have added to the uncertainty on global oil markets, and global supplier constraints are causing higher fuel prices here at home. So we do acknowledge that, and our plan, which I just outlined in the previous question around providing relief where we can without adding to the inflation problem, is a key response to that. Now, at the same time, we have been repairing the budget, so we're creating more room to provide support where we can, and also allow for space for those competing pressures on the budget, which are increasing, not decreasing. And I do note that budget repair has been recognised by the IMF
Minister.
recently. And
Senator Walsh, second supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, inflation is moderating, but Australians in many towns and cities around the country are still feeling the cost of living pinch. This pressure will continue to be felt in the lead-up to Christmas. What can Australians expect in the coming months to build on the support that has already been delivered to provide targeted cost of living relief?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the question. Well, inflation is moderating and we welcome that, but we know that it will remain higher than we'd like for longer than we'd like, and we do monitor these pressures closely, and our plan is aimed at delivering that cost of living relief without adding to the inflation challenge. But those measures do include the electricity bill relief, cheaper childcare, increased rent assistance, the Medicare bulk billing initiative, all of these that we've been rolling out since budget day, the cheaper medicines and boosting income support payments. And in particular, on September 20th, so since we last met, there have been that important increase to payments, so that job seeker payment recipients will now receive a base payment of $749.20 per fortnight, a $56 increase. Parenting payment single has come in, and those recipients will receive an extra $227.50 per fortnight compared to their current rate. So no doubt these increases will support those households doing it tough
Minister,
right now.
Thank you. Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Before the last election, the Prime Minister stated emphatically, "I don't think, I know that Labor's Powering Australia plan will cut power prices," and Labor promised a $275 cut, not once, but on 97 occasions. However, recent figures released by the Australian Energy Market Operator reveal that energy bills have risen by over 20% in the past 12 months, with a record number of households and businesses claiming hardship assistance. Was the Prime Minister lying or just reckless when he solemnly pledged to cut power prices for Australian households?
Thank you, Senator Hughes. I just remind people about the use of that terminology, and just to ask you if it's in further questions to use different language. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you, President, for the call. I would like to begin the answer by acknowledging and reminding people of the energy crisis that we inherited on coming into government. In fact, I remember Minister Bowen having to leave the swearing-in ceremony at Government House to make sure that the lights stayed on across the country because of the mess that we inherited from those opposite who, remember, hid the power increase, hid the advice that you received around the increase in electricity from before the election.
Gallagher, please resume your seat. Order. 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 Minister Gallagher, please continue.
Thank you. For the former minister who hid the increases in energy prices before the election because he didn't want that to come out, But when it became clear what we inherited, we started day one going around and fixing the mess that we inherited, including delivering on our commitments that were included in the Powering Australia plan, which Senator Hughes outlined in her question. So yes, delivering on that, but also dealing with what we inherited with the war in Ukraine and the mess that we inherited from those opposite. Now, the modelling that was done in Powering Australia plan was done in 2019 to reflect the situation in 2025 from memory. And we are dealing with right here, right now, with the circumstances that we inherited. And the reality is renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy, and that if you put more investment and get more renewable energy into the grid, that it will moderate the increases in electricity prices. That is a fact, and that is accepted by everybody except those opposite in this place, which is exactly why we inherited the mess we did when we came to government, because you had your head in the sand for a decade.
Senator Hughes, first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. According to evidence given at the Senate's Cost of Living inquiry, Energy Australia is now dealing with 3 times the number of inquiries concerning energy bill relief than during the pandemic, while 45,000 customers are now accessing the company's hardship program. Why has the Prime Minister been so distracted by dividing the country that he's allowing this cost of living crisis to cause so much hurt to Australian families?
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Minister.
Thank you. Well, again, I can't take a question seriously from a party that opposed the energy bill relief plan. I mean, seriously. That is the money that was supported by this parliament to go and ensure that we could take some of the pressure off those bills. That is the single purpose of one of those questions that was put to this chamber, and you voted against it. So how can you then vote against households getting hundreds of dollars of relief off their winter bills and complaining about increasing costs when you voted against them getting any help? It doesn't make any sense. Australians realise that they've got a government that acknowledges that prices are high in a range of areas, and we are dealing with it with our 10-point plan that goes to a number of areas to support households and families who are doing it tough. And energy bills is one of those areas, and you voted against it.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Hughes, second supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. In evidence given to the Senate's Cost of Living inquiry, Origin Australia has revealed that 71,000 residential customers are now on the company's hardship program, an increase of 22% compared to last year. Will Labor accept responsibility? Sorry, I can't hear myself think over Minister Watt there. Will Labor accept responsibility for the electricity price increases happening under its watch and apologise for breaking their election promise?
The time for answering the question has expired. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. We'll take responsibility for the energy bill relief we successfully got through this parliament. We'll take responsibility for the cheaper childcare package. We'll take responsibility for the rent assistance, for tripling the Medicare bulk billing rate, for making medicines cheaper, for boosting income support payments, for the fee-free TAFE program, remember another sector that you ignored, the vet sector, for building more homes, for expanding paid parental leave and for getting wages moving again. That is what we will take responsibility for.
Senator Green.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and fellow Senator for Queensland, Senator Watt. What is the government doing to create a level playing field in workplace relations to give workers a fair go?
Thank you, Senator Green. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Green, who, like so many people on this side of the chamber, spent much of her working life before coming here working for the interests of working people. As we know, something that I know is a foreign concept for those opposite. As we know, a key component in addressing the real cost of living pressure that many Australians are facing is increasing wages. And finally, we are moving on from a decade of a government that deliberately held down wages. Last month, the ABS labour force data showed that the number of Australians in work has never been higher than it is under the Albanese Labor government. And I'm not surprised that Senator Cash is interjecting because, of course, she was one of the ministers for industrial relations that tried to keep wages down, and I would be embarrassed about that as well. More than 500,000 jobs have been created since this government came to office, the most for any new government on record. After a decade of low wages being a deliberate design feature of people like Senator Cash, the Albanese government is ensuring that every single one of those workers is being paid accordingly. And thanks to long overdue reforms, wages are finally moving again under the Albanese government, and employers are back at the bargaining table thanks to last year's Secure Jobs Better Pay reforms. However, loopholes do still remain within the Fair Work Act that undermine worker pay and conditions. Again, loopholes that existed under legislation we inherited from Senator Cash and the opposition. The first loophole is that if a worker steals from an employer, it is a crime, as it should be. However, if an employer quite deliberately steals from their worker, in most places in Australia it is not a crime. The Albanese government is closing this loophole by criminalising wage theft. The second loophole is the idea of the forced permanent casual worker, and we're standing up for casual workers by giving them, those who are working like they are permanent, a chance to convert to permanent employment. And we'll see how much the opposition cares about workers and cost of living when it comes to a vote.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Green, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, thank you for that update. What impact do these existing loopholes in the workplace relations system have on workers' wages and their job security?
Minister Watt.
Well, thank you, Senator Green. Unfortunately, these loopholes that we've inherited from 10 years of coalition government disproportionately affect vulnerable workers like women, young people and migrants. We need a strong new deterrent to ensure workers get the pay they are entitled to, and that's why we're acting on wage theft, something the former coalition government didn't do in the 10 years they were in office. Some casuals work just like permanent employees, but they don't get any of the benefits of job security under the laws we inherited from the coalition government. And closing this loophole will give more than 850,000 casual workers who are working in an ongoing way the option to request permanency if they want it. No one will be forced to convert from casual to permanent if they don't want to. Labour hire loopholes undermine the integrity of the enterprise bargaining system, and closing this loophole, something the coalition didn't do in the 10 years they were in office, that will only affect a small number of workers. But for the workers this affects, closing this loophole will be life-changing. There will be more that we do because we're serious about getting wages moving again.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Green, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Well, there is a lot to say over there on that side of the chamber. So, Minister, could you let us know what was the opposition's legacy in closing these loopholes that have continued to undermine workers' pay and conditions?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, Senator Green. Well, of course, under the former coalition government, there was always a new excuse for why they couldn't deliver a wage increase for workers. Just wait for low unemployment. If unemployment comes down, then wages will go up. That's what they said. But, of course, unemployment came down and wages were still held down by the coalition government. Then they moved on. Just wait for productivity increases, they said. But, of course, they never came under the former coalition government either. And the Leader of the Opposition can stand on shop floors and work sites in outer suburban areas and make all the claims that he wants about being for the battler, but workers know the Liberals and Nationals are not on their side and never have been on their side. They've only ever been on the side of holding back workers' wages. The coalition said no to Secure Jobs Better Pay before they even read the bill. And why did they say no to that? They didn't like the name of the bill, Secure Jobs Better Pay. Oh, we better vote no against that straight away. But what has occurred since that bill's been passed? Stronger jobs growth, higher wages.
Thank you, Minister.
We're acting,
the time
you're
for
opposing.
answering has expired. Minister Watt.
I ask that further questions be placed on notice.